Welcome to the VETS School of Governance webinar on building state capacity and improving accountability. It's a great honor to have the Auditor General, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, who will be delivering the public lecture for us. She will be in conversation with Professor Pundy Pillay, who is with the VETS School of Governance.
As Professor Mzu was saying, it is a great pleasure for us and an honor in the School of Governance to welcome you to make this presentation. I have seen your CV, and it is something that we as South Africans should be intensely proud of, given that you are not only the Auditor General at the present time, but also you are the first woman to hold this position in the entire history of the Auditor General's office. For the benefit of our audience, let me say a little bit about your background. You're a chartered accountant for more than 20 years with considerable experience in both the private and public sectors in areas as diverse as auditing, consulting, corporate advisory, development finance, investment management, and skills development agencies. Tsakani also served on the Presidential BE Advisory Council, where she successfully led a subcommittee that developed recommendations for broad-based Black economic empowerment. As chairperson of the CA Charter Council, she led the first BE sector charter, which focused on key transformation initiatives that improved access for Black people to enter the profession. Tsakani's career, in her words, is motivated by a passion to actively contribute to advancing both Black men and women in the accountancy profession. She has pursued this passion through her work with various organizations, including Business Unity South Africa, African Women Chartered Accountants, and the Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants of Southern Africa, of which she is a past president. A current role as the non-executive chairperson of the board of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants represents a continuation of this work. It is quite evident that her commitment to service excellence and ethical leadership and her contribution to transformation has been widely recognized, and she was awarded by the presidents of AGSA, AUCA, and the Black Management Forum. Ms. Maluleke, it is, for me to repeat this, it is indeed a great pleasure for us to welcome you to the School of Governance. We have no doubt that you are a role model, not only for young women, but people across this land. So welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pundy, and good evening to you, and a good evening to Prof. Mzu, whom I know is being challenged by ESCOM at the moment. I hope he'll be able to join us later. Members of the academic community, staff members, students, invited guests, fellow South Africans, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It gives me immense pleasure this evening to have a chance to address you and share some insights on the work that we do as South Africa's Supreme Audit Institution. As you know, the Constitution mandates the AGSA to support democracy by auditing and reporting on how taxpayer funds are being spent. As the nation's SAI, which is a Supreme Audit Institution, we aim to use our reports to inform and inspire the right action by those that are appointed as stewards of public institutions, so that citizens may benefit from effective and sustainable service delivery. The work of the AGSA is carried out by our 3,500 staff members who operate across the length and breadth of South Africa. These are men and women that I'm proud to call my colleagues who have chosen to serve South Africa and all of her people. Prof. Pundy, we are meeting a day after our beloved continent celebrated Africa Day. And this we did under the theme, the Year of Arts, Culture, and Heritage. This theme bodes extremely well with aspiration number 5 of the African Union's Agenda 2063, which advocates for an Africa that has a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. These are the same values and ethics that should guide us as we aim to build a capable state with an ethical culture in the public service, whilst promoting accountability in our country, and to emulate this right throughout the continent. The same Agenda 2063 further calls for an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Looking across the continent, we must admit that we are still far from achieving these noble aspirations. However, the African Union agenda does lay the foundation, and it does serve as an important reference point for improvement. My view is that it is upon our own generation to fix what we consider to be wrong, or what we may consider to be far from ideal. It is upon our own generation to act so that our countries may prosper and the continent may flourish. This can only be achieved through capable institutions that are led by competent and dedicated leadership. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed many of our institutional weaknesses, and indeed it has exacerbated the already high inequality throughout our society. As a country, continent, and as the world grapples with vaccination programs, key questions, troubling questions emerge. One, are our institutions resilient enough to respond to crises? Have we built adequate control to enable us to monitor and prevent financial losses in emergency situations? And are our mechanisms and instruments for accountability strong enough to drive appropriate consequences? There are no easy answers, but hopefully in the end, we can provide some foundations for engagement and ultimately for improvement. As the National Audit Office, the COVID-19 pandemic was indeed unprecedented, but it was challenging not just for us, but for our auditees as well. As I indicated, the Constitution enjoins us to deliver on our audit mandate at all times, even during a crisis. Maybe I would say, especially during a crisis such as what we've lived through. In the midst of the uncertainty and complexity that was brought about by the pandemic, the AGSA leadership was forced to be deliberate in ensuring that our workforce remained productive, that we maintained the key elements that make for credible audit work that enhances transparency, accountability, and effective oversight. As the AGSA leadership, we had to continue to deliver our outputs even greater than what we had done before. And we had to do this without compromising our standards. We had to accelerate our technological advancements as an audit office so that we could enable different ways of working. We had to keep our staff safe whilst adhering to regulations. We had to keep our audit teams motivated, despite the natural and understandable fear of working while infection rates remained high. It is important for me to state that we've been able to do all of this work because we benefit from solid institutional foundations that are capable of absorbing significant shocks. And this is important for any institution, especially any state institution. The work we did was done with the sole objective of strengthening our country's democracy by enabling oversight, accountability, and governance in the public sector. This period of crisis required agility, adaptability, and perseverance. And I'm so proud that our teams did not disappoint. Indeed, their courage and resilience proved most inspiring. Following the nationwide lockdown in March 2020 and the subsequent announcement made by President Ramaphosa of the 500 billion rand emergency relief package, which was to be spent through various initiatives across government, it was clear to us that our work would be cut out for us. We went ahead and conducted special real-time audits of the 500 billion rand expenditures by government, and that was cutting across national, provincial, and the local government spheres. And this was a new endeavor, something we'd not done before, and it was made even more challenging by the inherent limitations of working during lockdown, with limited access to physical documentation in auditee premises, and with limited physical interaction between our staff and the staff of our audit teams. So thanks to a combination of technology, but also commitment, adaptability, and resilience of our teams. And I want to raise that it was resilience and adaptability and commitment of our own teams, but also the teams of the auditees, who are government institutions. Because of that, we were able to deliver 2 special reports on COVID-19 relief initiatives. And we are on course to deliver a 3rd one, which focuses on COVID-19 related spend in municipalities. And we should be able to release that at the end of June 2021. The audit reports and messages from these real-time audits have allowed us to identify and flag irregularities and control deficiencies on a timely basis. And this allowed those that run government, the appointed stewards of our public institutions, to act swiftly, such that resources were protected and service delivery was indeed enhanced. I'll give you an example. Through our work on the TERS benefit, which was the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, which were payments made by the UIF, as well as the work we did at SASSA on their special relief grants, we were able to audit transactions within 2 or 3 months of them being generated. And we could immediately identify risks. And indeed, we identified instances of underpayments, overpayments, fraud, and double dipping. And when we communicated our audit findings, corrective action was quickly taken, such that correct controls lapses were immediately addressed, consequences were applied for wrongdoing, and funds were recovered. It is also common knowledge that we picked up irregularities in the procurement of PPE, which has been the subject of investigations by the Special Investigations Unit. And this happened because we were able to collaborate with a state institution in the context of the Fusion Center. So Prof. Pillay, I want to share with you one other piece of recent news. The International Budget Partnership recently, in fact, just 2 days ago, tabled a report titled Managing COVID Funds, the Accountability Gap. In this report, they assess government's interventions to confront the health and economic consequences of the pandemic. If you'd allow me to share some key findings from this report, as I believe they are relevant to our discussion today. The report draws a conclusion that governments are falling short of managing their fiscal policy responses to the crisis in a transparent and accountable manner. We're pleased that South Africa fared as one of the countries that provided some level of accountability in the introduction and implementation of their early fiscal responses. The report further notes that governments acted swiftly to put in place adequate transparency around their policy responses, where accountability institutions such as the legislatures or parliaments and supreme audit institutions such as ours, where they stepped up to provide effective oversight, and civil society organizations also contributed with information on the needs of the most vulnerable. Put simply, this report recognizes the importance of collaboration across society, the importance of a commitment to accountability and transparency, and the value of following through on the actions by each of the players in the value chain, be they people who run government, be they people within civil society, or supreme audit institutions, and even parliamentarians. In a succinct way, and interestingly, in a way that's consistent with the messages that we've been sharing through our various audit reports, this particular report says that urgent action does not have to come at the expense of accountability. In conclusion, the report makes the following recommendations. Says, act now to strengthen accountability in ongoing responses to the COVID-19 crisis. And this recommendation comes because there's an acceptance that we have to keep learning, we have to keep improving as a demonstration of a commitment to continued improvement. The other recommendation says strengthen capacities and basic systems for accountability in the annual budget cycle so that the country is better prepared for future crises. These messages resonate extremely well with our own AGSA messages, which we've been communicating out of our audit cycles for a number of years now. We still believe that if these recommendations are implemented, they will enable the change we desire. We're also pleased to see that our work received recognition from independent bodies, and we urge both oversight and executive structures to heed this call, to act now on accountability. At the end of the financial year, the pandemic took its toll on national and provincial government. However, despite these challenges that we faced, we managed to deliver and complete our audit, the outcomes of which are the subject of our engagement today. While we audited the financial statements for national and provincial government for the year ended March 2020, we audited these under extremely difficult circumstances. We were still able to deliver credible reports, which we believe have served to instill public confidence in a manner that's consistent with our constitutional mandate. And I'll share some highlights from our 2020 financial year audit. Key to our findings is that there cannot be effective public accountability without strong, professional, and stable leadership, which will strengthen and create the environment that is conducive to effective performance, transparency, and accountability. We've often observed that stability in key positions is a driver for improving poor audit outcomes. And this is especially true for the roles of accounting officer and chief financial officer. And by accounting officer, I'm referring to the directors general, the heads of department, the municipal managers. And by chief financial officer, I'm referring to, as you would say, the CFO, but even the FDs in some of the entities of the audit. These two roles, accounting officer and chief financial officer, they allow for an ethical and effective control culture to be embedded and for the correct tone to be set at the top. Naturally, we concede they work with other colleagues. However, for our work, in terms of what we've seen around the management of public finances, we've deemed that it is these two roles that play a significant role in ensuring that transparency, accountability happens alongside effective performance. They are the leadership of the public institutions. And we believe, having done the analysis over many, many years, we believe that key to this is not so much about how long they're in their roles, which is important, because there's been an interesting and compelling correlation between tenure in these roles and audit outcomes. So we believe we've got to worry about tenure just as much as we worry about competence and their commitment to integrity and ethical values. The actions and behaviors of the leadership of public institutions are critical in creating a functioning internal control system, which is absolutely essential to any institution that can deliver effectively, that can account transparently, and demonstrate the appropriate level of accountability for the resources that have been allocated to them. Looking beyond the effects of the lockdown, instability in the accounting officer position also had a severe impact on us as we effected our new audit powers. These new powers, I think you're aware, are intended to act as a complementary mechanism in the broader public sector accountability value chain. As you're aware, that just over 2 years ago, our enabling legislation, the Public Audit Act, was amended to enhance our powers. Essentially, it's giving us not just the power to audit and report, but to rather also follow up on the implementation of the recommendations that we issue following the completion of an audit. As of the 1st of April 2019, we undertook to phase in the implementation of these powers. And we did this because we had to enable space, create space for both our auditees and our auditors to become acquainted with the powers, to make sure that we could implement them with the rigor and the appropriate level of thoroughness that South Africans are used to from the Audit Office. The second year of our implementation, which was 2020, it was in this area that we then had to contend still with the troubles of lockdown and COVID-19. In the second year of implementation, we managed to identify and confirm the much anticipated material irregularities, or MIs. Through our perseverance, and I'll say it again, our strong institutional audit system, we managed to identify a total of 75 material irregularities. And perhaps I should pause and explain what these material irregularities are. The MIs refer to any non-compliance with or a contravention of legislation, any fraud, theft, or breach of fiduciary duty that we identify during an audit that we conduct under the auspices of the Public Audit Act. And we have to look at that non-compliance and consider whether its impact has had, demonstrates evidence of financial loss, evidence of public harm, evidence of loss or harm to a public institution. And if we're able to see that, if we're able to link an irregularity, a non-compliance, to the impact of financial loss or public harm, then we call that a material irregularity. And the amendments basically say that once we've identified a material irregularity, we then notify the accounting officer of this particular MI. And if they act in a manner consistent with the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act, then we don't have to take the matter forward. However, if they fail to act, then we're required to refer the matter to a public body to investigate further. And if they still don't act, we are allowed to issue a recommendation in the audit report. And if they still fail to take the requisite action, then we can issue binding remedial action. And if following our issuing of binding remedial action, there is still no appropriate action by the accounting officer, then we can issue a certificate of debt. The type of action we're referring to would include stemming whatever losses are resulting from that non-compliance, investigating to ensure that they know who caused that loss and discipline them, investigate to ensure that if there is evidence of criminal conduct, then they refer that matter to law enforcement agencies, and also to recognize that there must have been some or other internal control lapse that needs to be attended to. If an accounting officer does all of those things as already provided for in the Public Finance Management Act, then we don't have to step in. We would step in with a recommendation, with a referral, with binding remedial action, and eventually with a certificate of debt if there is repeated failure by an accounting officer. Now, we're only too aware that the public and even Parliament and members of the executive have expressed some impatience for the Office of the AG to issue that ultimate sanction, which is a certificate of debt. We have been cautious around driving that journey, not because we are unmotivated to do it, but because we've got to follow the principles of fair administrative justice. such that by the time we issue a certificate of debt, which is in the name of the accounting officer that failed to act, and it essentially affects their pocket, by the time we issue that certificate of debt, we need to have demonstrated that we have given that accounting officer every opportunity to act as they should. Identifying MIs enables us to support the accounting officer and accounting authority by bringing irregularities to their attention, while also empowering them to take timely action. This notification of MIs, simply this, before we have to take any other action, we believe notifying accounting officers of these MIs should drive them as appointed stewards to take action that lessens the adverse effect of such irregularities on auditees, make sure that they set the right tone for accountability, highlight the need for consequences, and indeed action that encourages behavioral changes at the highest level. We would have loved to see more MIs during this PFMA cycle. However, as I indicated, one of the things that hampers progress is instability at accounting officer level. When we issue an MI, an accounting officer leaves or moves to a different role, we then have to take a few steps back to notify the new accounting officer so that they in turn familiarize themselves with the matter and are given an appropriate and adequate opportunity to take the action that they should. However, we are encouraged that we've been able to identify 75 MIs to the value of 6.9 billion rand. Going forward, we'll continue to track how accounting officers are responding to the MIs and whether or not they are taking the action that is deemed to be appropriate and adequate to deal with the irregularity. When we speak of strengthening state capacity, which has been severely weakened by the inconsistency and instability of leadership in key institutions, we're encouraged by the steps that government has been taking to deal with professionalizing the public sector. And here I refer to the published draft of the National Implementation Framework towards the professionalization of the public service. This framework is a step in the right direction, and it is one that responds to our repeated audit messages that call for government to strengthen the capability of institutions and ensure stability at leadership level. We believe that the efforts to professionalize speak directly to the challenges that are reflected in our audit outcomes. And if this framework is successfully implemented, it should create the foundation that addresses many of these issues, and it should improve the public service offerings to the people of South Africa. What the framework describes correlates well with the professionalization journey that our own office embarked upon in the early 1990s, where we focused on both standardization and professionalization of staff, as well as creating an appropriate environment for our staff to function in. This continued journey, where there was a continuity of focus, a continuity of attention to the issue, has delivered a national audit office that today boasts of having the largest training scheme under SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, that boasts having over 680 chartered accountants that work for the office on an ongoing basis, and that also boasts having more than 500 registered government auditors, audit professionals that have chosen to stay within the office and contribute to the work that we do. And it's because of that consistent institutional investment. And the document also correlates well with the work that's aimed at professionalizing the public sector audit function globally. And this is an initiative that our own office leads in our role as the chair of the Capacity Building Committee of the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, commonly known as INTOSA. And this is a body that brings together all auditors general from different parts of the world in pursuit of common interests, of which professionalization of our audit staff is one. The framework that's been issued by South Africa's government equally calls for integrity and ethical conduct by public servants, which is consistent with the provisions of Section 195 of the Constitution, which demands that high standards of professional ethics be promoted and maintained. It is our belief that this initiative will ensure a professional, effective, and responsive public service, one that the South African citizen deserves, and one that can make good on the promises of the Constitution, of the National Development Plan, and other government strategies and initiatives. Improving audit outcomes and accountability is not easy. There must be deliberate change, and there must be a will to build skilled and stable capacity within the state. I can't emphasize this too much. We must demand strong, ethical leadership that will build accountable institutions and ensure that there is a strong ethical culture that is focused on making the lives of citizens better. Strong institutional resilience and ethical culture, coupled with capable and stable leadership, should persist even during periods of crisis or uncertainty. As the AGSA, we believe that we are a living testament to this through what we've managed to achieve, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Program Director, if the aspirations of the continent's Agenda 2063 are to be realized, it must be all hands on deck. We all must recognize that we have a role to play. As an audit office, we would advocate for the academic community to design and roll out programs and academic projects that encourage and institutionalize ethical and resilient leadership, and to themselves model this very brand of leadership. We owe it to our forefathers to build a developmental state that builds on the gains that have been brought about by our democracy. And here I would like to end my remarks by thanking you for your very kind attention. Thank you very much, Prof. I hand back to you.
Hi, thank you very much for that inspiring talk. I think that it is quite evident, both as a consequence of the work that you have done in the AG's office over many years, as well as the work of many of your inspiring predecessors, that the AG's office can clearly claim to be one of the few efficient public sector institutions that we have in the country. And I think you've outlined many of the critical issues that public sector institutions need to address in order to become more efficient and effective. There are some questions on the in the question panel there, but I'll come to them just now. I just want to abuse my position as the host to ask the first question, and that is that you said at the beginning, you referred to the capable state, which of course is a key aspect of the country's national development plan. Now, question is, because the notion of the capable state has remained largely elusive to us as a country, given your experience in the AG's office, what is needed to move us much more quickly towards grasping this concept of the capable state? And I'd also add there, how do you see other non-governmental actors helping us to do this, particularly civil society and the private sector, with whom you deal quite a lot, given the nature of what you do? So, in summary, is the capable state achievable, or is it an elusive notion? Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. I think we can concede that it has been an elusive goal up to now. For us to thrive as a country, we have to continue to find ways to grapple with how we build such a capable state. We simply have no other option than to grapple with those things. And if I stick with the theme for today, which is really about leadership, I believe that a critical part of how you build state capability is by ensuring that institutions of state are run by men and women who have the skills to do what's required, who have the space to do what's required, who have the ethics to inform their action, and indeed are held accountable when things go wrong. Many of the things we find in the course of our audit are not really difficult things to do. I'll give you an example. Every year when we audit the local governments here, earlier I talked a lot more about provincial and national governments. I'll shift to the local governments here. Every year when we audit, we come out with dreary audit outcomes, especially around the area of financial management. And we've struggled with the question of why do municipalities struggle to put together a set of financial statements? Because it's not that difficult. What are the areas that drive this level of qualifications or problems or misstatements of financial statements? And we come back to three things. The lack of daily, regular disciplines, daily, weekly, monthly disciplines. If you don't have a set of financials where you have the habit of reconciling your bank account, which is not that difficult, right? If you can't say what you spend your money on every single month, right? It's not that hard. You don't have to be a chartered accountant to reconcile a bank account. It's really not that hard. So if you don't have that habit and you try and put together a set of financials long after the particular payments have been done, you've got no records to demonstrate what you spent your money on. You really have no hope of driving credible financial statements. So the things that trip a number of institutions is just those daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly disciplines. If you have the discipline of preparing financial statements every month, you'll quickly see whether you are the mayor or the municipal manager or even the CFO. If you have someone preparing that set of financials, you will know very quickly if bank accounts are not being reconciled, and then you can deal with it if it's a quarter behind. But if it's a full year behind and a few months later, you really have no chance. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the tendency to then want to outsource the work that government ought to do, even things like putting financial statements together. I'm not suggesting that there should be no reliance on private sector skills to complement what's already in place. But if you're not going to do your own basic things, you can't outsource it 16 months after a transaction to try and demonstrate what you spent your money on. And so local government will spend upwards of 900 million rand a year just for the purpose of putting financial statements together. Not anything else. I'm not even talking about anything else, just the sole purpose of putting those financial statements together. So this reliance on just complying with the idea of putting a set of financial statements, somebody else must do it for me, I don't have to worry about my regular discipline. And the third element is about consequence management. If you've got a CFO that cannot deliver a credible set of financial statements, there should be a few words held at the first instance and a lot fewer words at the second instance, because clearly they're not up to the task, because these are not difficult things. I concede there are some more technical aspects of a set of financial statements where people might need help, yes. However, when we look at them, we keep going back to what are these areas where entities struggle, and it's in the basics. So to sum up my answer, Prof, it's in those three areas, just basic disciplines. And whether you're talking financial information, performance information, compliance, project management, infrastructure investment, maintenance of infrastructure, all of those things, the same things would apply. It's about the regular disciplines. Don't outsource the things that you should be dealing with, the basics, and you just rather use private sector skills to complement what you have. And you got to have consequences. If you've got an engineer that's employed and they are not supporting you in ensuring that you have a maintenance plan that's properly funded, that's properly executed, you really have no hope of maintaining your infrastructure appropriately. And that's why then you always have this backlog. What can other players within our society do? Private sector, I'll give you once again that example around the preparation of financial statements. We've been struggling as an audit office to figure out why would a professional accountant agree to take on the role of putting together a set of financial statements when they know there's no hope. And then they want to fight with us at the point of audit. Instead of saying to that municipal manager or that mayor, look, you're not going to get a clean audit this year, let's accept it. Let's rather start building towards next year. Let's rather start getting your basics around records management, around disciplines, around segregation of duties. Let's get those things right and you build towards next year. Instead of taking the 900 million rand and leaving very little in the system. So I think let's find a way to ensure that the public sector does not exploit known weaknesses in government. And I believe if we all accept as South Africans that we are all in this thing together, it is in all our interests to behave appropriately and almost abandon the short-term views about personal extraction and work in a manner that recognizes that all of us have responsibilities as citizens. Then we'll be able to get something. I believe there's enough for all of us if we do the right things. The other part about civil society, I think partnerships with civil society can help. We saw it in the context of the COVID-19 response, whether it was on the part of government, but we also saw it in our own work where we partnered with a number of civil society organizations to help us understand some of government's initiatives and help us shape key recommendations on things government could do to improve how things are running. So I think there's always an opportunity to partner if we all accept that we all have a duty to behave responsibly as citizens. Thank you, Bob.
Great, thank you. Well, we now have questions flooding in on both our Q&A and the chat. So I'll try to get as many of these done in the next 10, 12 minutes that we have. So the first is from Paul Hoffman. And he asks, is there room in the Chapter 9 architecture of the Constitution for a new body to prevent, combat, investigate, and prosecute grand corruption, state capture, and kleptocracy in the manner envisaged by the Concord, seeing that the existing criminal justice administration is not up to the task? Did you get that?
I did, thank you.
Okay.
I know that Paul is a much more of an expert than I on the Constitution and on the design of the different roles that different institutions play. My observation is this: we have enough institutions. What we've got to do is demand, fund, and support different institutions so that they deliver on their own respective mandates. In the course of the COVID-19 real-time audits, there was the Fusion Center set up by the president. And that Fusion Center proved quite helpful for us as an audit office because we could essentially refer matters that we had audited, refer our findings, and work with our colleagues who came from different institutions within the investigations and law enforcement arena. And they were able to take different aspects of the work and deal with it quickly. So where I'm going is that I don't believe that you need a new institution. What you've got to do is sort out the capability and delivery of existing institution, the collaboration across the existing institution, so that we limit the instances of fragmentation and duplication, but rather drive much more effective collaboration amongst us. And as I say, the work we saw happening in the context of the most recent audits proved quite inspiring. In a short space of time, not only were resources being protected, but you and I as citizens were able to see law enforcement agencies kicking into motion and putting people in the dock. A number of people who have been found to be defrauding UIF were in the dock, SASA as well, in a very short space of time. So I think that's the type of thing we should be driving towards.
Thank you. Next question is from Shalane Timothy Mokhobodi. A very straightforward one. Is there any progress from the last media release on 2nd September 2020?
Yes, Charlene, the 2nd September 2020 media release was dealing with the first installment of our real-time audits on COVID-19 expenditures. On the 9th of December, we issued the second installment. And I'm sure if you look at our social media platforms or even on our website, you'll be able to get hold of that report. We called it Special Report Number 2. And we actually we tabled it and made it public in tribute to Gimi Magwetu, who was working on that report prior to his untimely death, just before the end of his term. We are working on the third installment, which is focusing on the spend in municipalities. So you can look out for that towards the end of June.
Okay, thank you again. I'm going to take one from the chat section from Christopher Klopper, who asks, what actionable measures will you be recommending government to take to enhance its ability to be more transparent?
I'd say two things in particular. The first one is, let's just get good about the disciplines of looking after public funds, making sure that our financial management systems are up to par, financial and performance management systems, which is a key part of what is an annual report, and a key part of what we audit as the National Audit Office. So let's get good about reporting on how we apply finances and how we drive performance in our institutions. And that will drive better transparency. The second aspect, I think let's just find ways to innovate more shorter term reports. And that's a challenge that we have as an audit office, to see how we can conduct much punchier and shorter time audits, because the reliance on the annual audit takes a long time. And by the time we tell the public about what happened 6 or 8 months before, so much time has passed, the relevance of the message diminishes. So we're looking at how we even can contribute to auditing and issuing reports on a more timely basis, looking at shorter time periods, especially for the auditees that are at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. There's an anonymous attendee question here, and that is, SARS has been concentrating on high net worth individuals. What is the AG's stance on lifestyle audits, especially for accounting officers and executives?
I think it's well understood that lifestyle audits serve as a deterrent, at least, and they also serve as an opportunity to identify problems quickly. So I do think that there is space to conduct those lifestyle audits, and we certainly would encourage that. Any accounting officer should be willing to put themselves out for such an audit, because if we are behaving ethically, we should be willing, as public servants who are stewards of public resources, we should be willing to open ourselves up to the appropriate level of scrutiny.
Great, thank you. In the chat section, Ntakuseni Razwidani asks the following. On issues such as the implementation of the AG's recommendations, like internal control and systems-related issues, how can Parliament, as an oversight structure, effectively ensure an improvement in governance, given its own limitations, I guess, as a political structure?
For me, the role of Parliament is quite important. We target our reports to Parliament, and it allows them to hold accounting officers accountable. So scopers, the public accounts committees in the different legislatures, the 9 provincial legislatures, as well as the national, they have the ability to then call accounting officers and make sure that there is accountability. The clarity of the different roles that public representatives hold as those who drive accountability and oversight, and the role that public servants hold as appointed public servants. For me, that is quite clear. I just think we tend to confuse those roles. And I think we need to just get better at separating those roles. It will be interesting to see the recommendations that come out of the Commission on State Capture, and to see what the Deputy Chief Justice recommends in terms of how Parliament could improve its processing, but also even for us as an audit office on how we could interact with Parliament as we support them in allowing them to drive much more effective oversight. So we're looking out for that with great interest.
Okay, thank you. We will end this shortly. We cannot continue exploiting your generosity. There's one from Khalid Desmond Golding, who says, good evening, Madame Auditor General. So I don't know if you've been addressed that way before. The concept of material irregularities, is there a framework or document that defines them, the processes, the approach and procedures in dealing with them and the consequences thereto?
Absolutely. So I would address Khalid in this way. The Public Audit Act, as amended, is pretty clear on what we do, and in Section 5 of the Public Audit Act. We've also published regulations, which we published following our consultation on them with SCOAC, the Standing Committee on the Office of the AG in Parliament. And those regulations set out how we as an audit office are implementing those powers. So there's clarity about what each of our processes looks like. There's clarity also about what the consequences would be. So I think a combination of those two documents would be quite helpful. On our website, we've put out a number of guidance documents that simplify these two documents. So it's sort of foundationally those two documents, the Act and the regulations as published, but also we've put out some information and frequently asked questions that allow people to become acquainted with our processes.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, given our time constraints, the final question I will put to you is from Laura Bazaden-Hout. Attorney General, could you please also outline how the ordinary citizen can use the Auditor General's work and play their role in strengthening our democracy? Maybe an appropriate question to conclude on.
Absolutely. So our call to citizens is always, first of all, care about the things that the Office of the AG keeps saying, because they affect your life and will have an effect even on the lives of your children and your children's children. So pay attention. It allows you to participate in our democracy in different ways. I'll use an easy example. If in your municipality where you live, there is an engagement with the leadership of that municipality through the council or the mayor or the municipal manager around the IDP for that municipality, take an interest. Look at the financials from the last year, ask the key questions, go to the meetings, go to the engagements, understand what impact these decisions that the people that are running public institutions on your behalf, what the impact of their decisions is on you, on your fellow citizens, but importantly, on the generations that come after you. So take an active interest.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, I think that this has been truly inspiring. So I want to thank you on behalf of the Wits School of Governance, but also all of our participants. The number of questions and comments, I think, could be seen as a very useful indicator of the value of your input. So we're very grateful. I'll use Khalid's term, Madam Auditor General. Thank you very much for this. We really appreciate it, and we hope that we can interact with you and your office again in the not too distant future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I'm a strong admirer of the work that the Vet School of Governance does. So if ever there's an opportunity to interact with you guys and your students in any way, we would welcome it as an office. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.